Welcome to the second episode of CrewCast. Today I'm joined by Peter Duran, the multi-talented entrepreneur who wears many hats across Berlin. Musician, runner, business owner, Peter does it all. We discuss his journey towards running, the communities he's building in Berlin, and his vision for the intersection of running and coffee. I really enjoyed our conversation. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Enjoyed this conversation with Peter. Would you quickly mind introducing yourself? Sort of like for folks who don't know you, for me who's just getting to know you now, like who you are and how you came to be in Berlin.
So my name's Peter Duran. I'm from a small town north of Detroit. I grew up there and I left the States when I was 20. I'm 37 now. Studied in Argentina, had my first job in Spain, met a German woman that brought me to Germany, but in the West. And then I moved to Holland for a couple years to do my master's degree. And then just over 10 years ago, I came to Berlin.
So you're almost at that point where you've been living outside of the U.S. more than than you grew up in Detroit.
Yeah.
So you're like mostly expat almost.
Yeah.
Coming across that line soon.
Yeah. It definitely feels stranger every time I go home.
Yeah.
Which is usually about every year and a half. And more and more like this is definitely where I'd call home, because I lived in that part of Michigan my whole life, but I didn't live in the same town the whole time. So Berlin is the longest I've ever lived in any one like town, and I've been in this neighborhood for all 10 years. So.
And have you always been running?
Not really, no. I actually started almost as a way to learn German.
Okay.
I used to be quite a heavy guy, and I had a university scholarship for bowling.
Okay, two things I would never have expected. Now looking at you, that you would have been heavier because you're like 5% body fat. Two, that you would have been a bowler. Okay, is this an American university?
Yeah, exactly. So it was a big Division II school.
Okay.
Everyone there played a sport, if you want to call it a sport. But at the time, my ambition was to become professional, and my coach had said that I was too heavy.
Yeah.
And I was taking a lot of painkillers because of the weight you put on your knee. Matches were a lot longer than if like in high school. And so like I started to lose weight, and running was one of those things, like weightlifting.
Yeah.
A bit more mindful about my diet. And running was kind of a means to an end. Okay. But there was something in it I liked. I feel like I've always liked this kind of medium heavy strain where like a 6.5, 7 out of 10, where you kind of have to focus on what you're doing and forget everything else. But I really got into it when I was like 23, 24, when I moved to Bochum, which is in the Ruhrgebiet, so around Dortmund, this area. And my ex-girlfriend's mother, who spoke no English, said, if you want to learn German well, you can join my triathlon team and come out on these long runs with all these old people who don't speak any English, but they're going to be super interested in you, and they'll just ask you questions for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds cool. And as an extra motivation, she said, I'll pay for your first marathon if you really like see a whole training block through. Shout out to Barbara, because she definitely changed my life. I really liked it a lot. There was something about like the process behind planning the training, needing to go to bed a certain time, having to eat certain things, kind of like measurable incremental progress. I'm a very process-oriented person, and I think it just like really tapped into that side of my personality.
I mean, it shows, because I've been in that exact situation when I moved here to Berlin. I also was trying to learn German, and I also joined a couple of running groups, but it didn't work. It didn't work for me. So I guess it maybe speaks to, one, how persistent you are, and two, like how nice these folks were to you, because I've definitely been in German-speaking groups where people are just rapid firing questions at you, and you have no idea what they're saying. So that's pretty impressive that you were learning German through running. Do you feel like this growing up in a bowling alley where it's like a lot of community was part of sort of what drew you to like running in a group like that, or because that, like, I don't know, whenever I've been in bowling spaces, it feels like the community aspect is a massive part of the sport.
Yeah, I mean, I never made that connection, but it's a good point because I think I really enjoy, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit more, but I really enjoy the facilitation of community, but I don't really like being in the front myself. I really like setting something up and stepping back and watching how people interact with one another. And I also worked in the bowling alley in my hometown. Yeah, and I guess community was a huge part of it. I also have, like, I'm from a very big family. My father's family is Mexican, and tons of cousins, and like everything was an operation.
Yeah.
You know, like family dinner was like 20 people came, and you'd like be piecing card tables together, and yeah, I don't know. I guess I grew up in that, but just because we grew up in things doesn't mean we necessarily like them. But that's something that gives me a lot of energy, I would say.
It's facilitating.
Yeah, for sure.
And do you have like a first moment that you were like, wow, this running thing is like a moment that you remember where it kind of clicked for you, or you're like, you kind of realized that like this running thing was interesting, or was it more of like seeing the progress day by day?
I think I really enjoy, when I lived in the west of Germany, and that was, 12, 13 years ago, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't this thing where I felt like it was necessary to feel right the way it is now. Like, I think there's just something around the movement and the kind of like, yeah, I guess the mindfulness it requires if you want to make some kind of progress that I really, really have come to enjoy. And I think like the moment where that happened, where that clicked, was around the pandemic. I had just picked up running maybe 2 or 3 years ago again, or 2 or 3 years previous to the pandemic. Because I had taken maybe 3 or 4 years where I didn't do it very seriously. When I went back to do my master's, yeah, I don't know. I lived in the Netherlands.
The Dutch rain got you down.
Dutch rain. I was on a bike a lot. I've always cycled a lot, and I still do cycle. But yeah, it wasn't a priority then. I was playing a lot of music, and I think like that studies and music really took the priority for me. But yeah, I had been training for this ultra marathon, just kind of because I wanted to, and then the pandemic came and it got canceled. And I'm a pretty like voracious, I think to an unhealthy degree, consumer of news. And at that time, the conflict in Yemen and the famine that was going on there was something that made me feel very, very hopeless. And my partner had suggested that I engage with it somehow. And so I had this idea to do the same distance I had wanted to do for the ultra marathon by myself.
Yeah.
And then kind of build a little bit of a campaign around it to see if we could raise money. And yeah, I think we raised like 6,000 euros to give to various charities, which is, felt very gratifying, and also like I think was a good reminder that you can't take on the weight of the world, but you have to like bite off little chunks that you're able to, digest yourself. Yeah, and around that process, I had a lot of support from friends that every 10 kilometers, a different friend joined me to kind of like pick up my spirits and give me something to eat. And
what was the distance you ended up
doing? It was 66K. Okay. So it was
not a short distance.
No.
For people in the freedom units, it's almost like it's around 40 miles. So
exactly.
It's a really long way.
Yeah. It took me just under 6 hours. I think it's like 5 hours, 40 minutes. And I ran to Potsdam and back.
Okay.
So I started in front of my cafe.
In front of Isla to Potsdam, Hauptbahnhof back, something around like that?
Yeah, there's a bridge. When you go past the woods, there's like a huge forest with a watchtower in it. And it's kind of a dual carriageway on both sides. You cross that bridge into Potsdam, and then you see Babelsberg, which is like their kind of Hollywood, right? And then loop around and come back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and at that time, a couple of friends and I had just started to kind of run together more regularly.
And this is during the pandemic, I'm guessing?
This is during the pandemic.
Okay.
Yeah, because you weren't really allowed to meet up with anyone.
Yeah.
And outside was okay. And I had been running, and my friend Colin, who was working at Isla at the time, wanted to start running because he's a big weightlifter. and his friend Lou wanted to run with him. She worked at Nike, and then she brought another friend along, and that was kind of like the start of Division BPM, this running group that we started together. It originally started off as kind of a way to build buzz for a friend's clothing brand that she had started in the US. And then at some point we kind of realized that this group was starting to crystallize around the cafe on Sundays. Yeah, and that was, I guess a little over 4 years ago now.
And you mentioned music. So were you playing in bands or DJing, or what's your relationship with music? Because BPM is beats per minute, so obviously the group is somehow related to music. But
yeah, I guess it wouldn't be very Berlin if it weren't somehow related to rave culture. When I when I moved here, I was mostly playing other people's music, so I was DJing.
Yeah.
I was making music with friends, and I played in, like, for lack of a better term, like metal bands since I was a kid. But
very Midwest.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Bowling and metal bands.
Yeah, like garage concerts, yeah, and like through metal, got into like industrial, which kind of got me into like EBM and techno, and then it kind of came full circle when I realized that like techno and a lot of house music comes from Detroit.
Yeah, so it's like this full circle moment where
and I didn't really
the famous show in Detroit that like people were listening to here that like brought techno. I forget the name of it, but it was like the public radio show. Something hour. But,
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, because Underground Resistance and all these guys were on there. So Derek May and Juan Atkins and yeah. But I had no clue because my parents, that's not their kind of music. My mom likes country. My dad likes like Led Zeppelin or gangster rap. Like it's an odd split, but yeah. Anyway, I was just mostly DJing, and I still do a little bit. But like when I moved here, I would say until about 3 or 4 years ago, I did it maybe 4 to 8 times a month, which is a lot.
That's a lot of late nights.
A lot of late nights, which is always why like the running was kind of a nice contrast, because it's also an incentive to kind of stay away from the darker parts of that lifestyle.
Totally.
And I think it's like this city legitimizes a lot of behavior that is quite antisocial, or at least not good for oneself. And it's not to pass judgment on anyone or anyone's lifestyle, but I think we all know that like context can legitimize certain behaviors,
and friend groups can legitimize behaviors, and then legitimize is maybe the wrong thing, but just normalize things.
Yeah, maybe that's the word.
Like all of these things are adult choices which adults can make, right? But it's like you can get sucked into the vortex. Like it happens, it can happen time to time. Even if you're running a lot, you get sucked into the vortex every once in a while.
Oh, for sure.
That's part of I think it also happens in running culture as well. Like people normalize things that in other contexts would seem unhealthy. Like people running like 130 miles or like 200 kilometers a week. Like that's also crazy, and like that's also normalized as well. But it's like it takes something that's healthy and makes it even like go to an extreme.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I definitely, through friends that run but maybe don't have the same approach to it as I do, I've definitely kind of realized that you can also go too far with running, and there is also something to it when it becomes a compulsion.
Yeah, totally.
Where it be like, when I said earlier that sometimes I don't feel right if I don't run, maybe it's a fine line, but it doesn't feel something that's like a neurosis.
Or yeah, exactly.
Or like an unhealthy compulsion, but it's more just like maybe this is like a bit woo-woo in me trying to justify how much I run, but I just feel like there's something very primal or very human about this need to move, and my job isn't particularly active, so it's
we weren't meant to sit at desks all day, right?
Yeah.
So I think that there's healthy addictions is like a hard thing to talk about, but there are things that are like people are addicted to, but they're maybe healthy, right? Like same like coffee. It's a great example. I'm drinking coffee. Am I addicted to coffee? Yes. But is it probably a healthy addiction? Yes. Could I go overboard and start having 5 espressos a day? Yes. But I gotta just sort of play with fire maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
So but I feel like there's probably no like direct recipe or formula to know what one thing is healthy, the other is not. It's just sort of like context, I feel like, is important, which gets back to what you were saying about like getting sucked into a context where certain behaviors were, maybe not the best for your health.
Yeah.
And so do you still from time to time end up playing music for folks, or?
Yeah. Now and again, I would say like it's kind of a bi-monthly thing now. I have something. I think I have like 2 parties in January, but nothing until then. I'll never sell my records, but like I don't have DJ equipment anymore because it's expensive, and it was just like sitting in my room.
Yeah.
And it kind of made me feel anxious. And it's something where I've always do have this. It's hard for me to sit idle. Like I really have a hard time sitting still. And I think it's been a good lesson in like limiting myself and focusing on kind of quality of output and quality time, and realizing that you Germans have this really nice phrase: you can't dance on all weddings at the same time, basically.
Yeah. I have the same problem. I have like a million things going on, so many balls in the air, and then you get too many, and then you start dropping them.
Exactly. And I think music in particular, very proficient as far as like the technical aspect of it goes, but that is like 10%
of the whole
whole thing. 90% of it is like having the headspace to go out and find new music and find old music, and to go out to parties, to know what's happening right now, how people feel when certain sounds are played on the dance floor. There's a lot of like field research, so to say, that has to happen, and I just didn't have the energy or the time for it. And so then I found myself in this situation where it felt quite contrived when I was playing, where it's like, I know this record's good, I know I can mix it with that record, should work, right? And like you can go on Bandcamp or whatever, and you like, if a certain sound is trending, like progressive house has been hot recently in trance, right, in the last couple of years, and it's like, okay, if you find something that sounds like everything else you're hearing but maybe is a little bit edgier, then it'll pass.
Yeah.
But that just became
it's
really
not authentic,
boring.
right?
No.
Like, it's so funny because I remember I was at a festival this summer, and there was all these kids. They're probably 18 and 19, and they're playing this 90s trance, and like, sure, could I go on Bandcamp and find the music that they're playing and like play it, but it's not authentic to me because like, it's I don't have there's a community around these sounds as well, right? Like, people get obsessed with specific parties or specific sounds, and it's like you see them around. It's funny because you'll see them around Berlin, like when you go to shows, like different friend groups will be at these places, and if you're not like plugged into that, it's not like that as authentic as as just like figuring out what exact songs people are playing and just doing something that's technically right but doesn't have this, maybe the word soul is maybe like the soul behind it, or
it feels disingenuous. And I think ideally people aren't looking at the DJ, but I have a hard time hiding when I'm not having fun, and I think people could probably look up and see a lack of enthusiasm. It's like, this guy's just getting paid.
It's pretty funny though, but you can like, there's also the classic like German DJ that just doesn't have any emotion, which is, I think, is always really fun. Really funny. It's like they just like pretend like they're having the worst time in the world, and it's like, are you having the worst time in the world? Or
no, they're just like engineering,
They're just engineering.
They're just no, I know what you're talking about, but I find there's something like quite hypnotic around like watching one of the old school German techno DJs, that is like every like micro move of a pot or a fader.
It's like they're just like sitting there coding. And that's the concentration level that it takes to get it to be perfect. Exactly. But it's always hard to tell from the audience, like if they're actually having fun. But that's so then the music, the running, like is there any sort of conversation between Division BPM and this sort of music background that you have? Like, have you guys thrown parties as with the running group, or is it just sort of like an inspiration for the community?
I think we've definitely wanted to have parties for sure as a group, and unfortunately it hasn't materialized. Like, a lot of us go out together still and do this kind of stuff together, and I would be lying if I didn't say that was also something that kind of the core, like the founding members, and I would say like early members to the group didn't bond on, because there's also times where we were able to have 20 or 30 people in a house and have a house party during the pandemic, and then we did. Or, you know, Colin, one of the other founders, and I would always go to this party put on by friends together called Spaghetti, and it was fantastic. It is just like one of our favorite things to do. So it felt like a natural fit. Yeah.
And the other aspect from the outside perspective, just interacting with some of the folks in the group, is that like fashion is also a big aspect of a lot of the members. Like there seem to be a lot of folks in Division BPM that are related to the fashion industry, work in the fashion industry. And you said that it was started as kind of like a plug for your friend's brand.
Yeah. So Colin works in fashion, kind of particularly this sportswear meets fashion, like gorpcore kind of thing.
What's the Instagram handle again?
APR Mag.
Oh, APR Mag. Yeah,
exactly. Is kind of their new project. But he worked for an agency before called Strike, and yeah, Lou worked at Nike. Leon works with like Suchuk and Bratwurst, and has done stuff for Arc'teryx and North Face. And so I think there was very much like an aesthetic to it. And Jack, who is also like is one of my best friends, but also my partner in Crews Brews, is a lifestyle and sports photographer.
Yeah.
So I think that really informs the aesthetic.
People are really creative. Like the for example, like the April shoe reviews were probably like one of the best. Have you seen them? The little graphics they put together. It's like I don't think I've seen anyone else do such an amazing visual for like shoes. It's just amazing.
Yeah, that's Christian Santiago from the States, and he started running with us maybe 2 years ago, and he's fantastic. He has this amazing ability to visualize stuff.
It's just so cool. And so like, yeah, so the group is super creative as a whole, and people are, like, I think I've been to a couple of the track runs in the morning, and it's just like, yeah, it's really interesting talking to people because everybody have like really interesting insights into like all the things with running that are happening, because I feel like running is expanding quite a bit in the last couple of years.
Definitely.
And a lot of these folks are kind of at the cutting edge, it feels like to me.
It's funny because I feel like definitely like the advent of running fashion
running fashion
has brought like another type of person to running, which I think is cool, because I think before it was like mom and dad sport, you know, and like it's cute when you go to park run on Saturdays and the 5K and you see everyone in their like neon gear and stuff like that, but that's a certain like part of society. And I think another niche is people that kind of want to feel good while they're running and feel like they look good. So yeah, I guess we definitely have these people, you know, that will like have really nice satisfied gear or whatever it might be. But we also have people who like show up in old track bottoms and like shoes that aren't running shoes. And
totally.
What I'm quite happy about is the fact that like, despite the fact that our aesthetic is what it is, and I really like that aesthetic, is it doesn't only attract that kind of person.
Because I know my partner, she's been several times and felt like included, and like the other thing is that the pace is it's not like you guys are running 3 minutes a kilometer, so it makes everybody able to join, and yeah, super awesome.
That's the goal, I think, because I mean so many people that run with us struggled to run the 10K, because we just started out with like the Sunday social 10K, which goes around Tempelhof, Hasenheide, back to the cafe. And for them, that was an achievement. And 3 years ago, we had 4 or 5 people run the Berlin Marathon. And this year we had 38 people run the Berlin Marathon. And it's not like all of a sudden a bunch of elites joined our group. It's the fact that like this group has somehow managed to create community for itself that like gets people to come back every week and gets people to find training partners who might be going for a similar time goal as them, or might live in the same part of the city as them, so they can meet up for a quicker run or a track session or something like that. And I think as captains, that's something we're super happy to see, is like the only thing we really control is the Sunday run, the Discord platform, and the Instagram, and everything else is up to the community. It's kind of like for them to do what they want with. Yeah. And that's been really gratifying to see.
People are really consistent. I mean, that's a really amazing thing. Like, were there any moments at the beginning where you weren't sure that it wasn't going to, like, the group was going to make it, where you were just sort of like, I don't really know if this is worth it, or like?
Well, to be honest, there was no goal.
Not that there was a goal, but just that like you were kind of maybe going to give up on this whole like facilitation thing.
Well, so let me put it a different way. It's like I would have run on Sundays with a pal, whether the group happened or not.
Yeah, totally.
And I think like I can remember specifically this time of year 4 years ago, the runs went from like 15 people to like 2 or 3.
Yeah.
I was like, well, fuck it, I'll do it anyway.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go. And at some point, like two and a half years ago, it felt like it just had kind of reached this critical mass, and that you'll go if a certain number of other people are going to be there too.
If someone else is waiting for you at that meetup point, it's like you don't really just, Sunday morning's already decided for you.
You don't really bail. And I think it's also something to look forward to, because a lot of people, one of our members, Philip, had kind of said that, I don't know if you realize this, but you guys have created this really great third space. Like a lot of people move here, they work remotely, they're far from their families, they maybe haven't found their community here in Berlin, but they have found that here, and they look forward to seeing each other every Sunday.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the point it's at now, where like the group, by virtue of the people that come and the culture they've created, has this like magnetism of its own, which is really nice.
Really cool.
Yeah.
And like really helpful, because I recently moved here, and I know what that feels like to find those people and feel like you have them. It makes it so that, you always have something social to do every week, regardless of like anything else, which is super grounding, especially if you're feeling like, I mean, it's what, 5 degrees out? I don't know. It's like 5 degrees out in gray. You can feel pretty depressed, especially this time of year. And like having that to come back to every week without fail, where you don't even need to think about it, is like super grounding and super helpful.
Definitely.
Yeah. And the other thing, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but is to talk about Crews Brews, because I think that's also a really interesting project and related to, so you've mentioned it a couple times, but you're the owner of a cafe as well. Do you want to just quickly plug Isla if people haven't heard of it, which would be surprising, because I've heard from many people like best coffee shop in Berlin.
That's high praise in the city.
The first time when I moved here, I was at a coffee cupping at in Mitte, and I was talking to one of the people there. I was like, "Oh, so what's the best, place to get coffee?" And they mentioned Isla, and they had worked for you in the past, and they were like, "And Peter's also a really good guy, so you should also say hi to Peter if you're ever there for." So
they drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
I wonder. I mean, it's so Isla's. I started with my very good friend Philip 8.5 years ago, and it's definitely ebbed and flowed over the years as far as like how I feel about what kind of job we're doing, because it's a small business and it's so dependent on like city dynamics and like the people that are working for you. But at the end of the day, like it still is one of my favorite places to drink coffee. We still like get people writing us, telling us that it's their favorite place. They really like the food. They really like the coffee. They really enjoyed the service. And I think being from the States,
it's the only place you can get a properly sized filter, right? I mean, this is the only coffee shop in all of Berlin that you can get a proper sized filter coffee.
Yes.
Because everywhere else, it's like you get an espresso filter and you're like, why did I pay €4 for this?
Exactly. Yeah. We definitely, that for me, that was a priority, because Philip and I had worked at another cafe, and we served hand brew. But I thought like, no, if we're going to do this, I want to normalize batch brew,
Yeah, normalize batch brew. We're going to indoctrinate all the Germans to get too hopped up on caffeine like you and I grew up. And also, where is the cafe? Just it's
in Neukölln in Hermannstraße, right near Tempelhof.
Right next to the U-Bahn station.
Exactly, right next to U8.
So if you ever go for a run at like Tempelhof, it's pretty much like the best place to stop for a piece of cake after going for a run at Hassenheide or Tempelhof after park run, as you mentioned.
And our staff is used to sweaty runners,
This is true. Yeah. I was in there recently, and it was pretty funny, because like I asked if we could close the door because it was freezing, because my t-shirt was super wet, and they were like, "Oh, of course." And it's just like so nice. And in other parts of the city, you'd get a angry look from someone. So it was really nice and accommodating.
I'm really happy to hear that. I have this. So I've worked in food my whole life, and one of my bosses said that you can train someone to make a coffee, you can train them to cook a steak, but you can't train them to not be an asshole. And I feel like just this kind of inherent, genuine generosity, this like ability, trying to find a way to say yes to your guests
Totally.
is so important. And it's not something that Germany or Berlin particularly, I think Berlin is exceptionally bad.
Really bad.
Excels at.
Excels at making it really bad.
Yeah.
Like we have this classic example of like, we were at this wine bar next to our house, and we were like, can we sit down? And the person who was working was like, yeah, 1 second, let me just finish my cigarette. And then we were just like standing there for 5 more minutes, and they had another cigarette. We're like, cool, can we sit down now? And they're like, oh yeah, actually, okay, let me finish this other cigarette. And it's just like, wait, what is going on? Like, what universe are we living in? It's just like so classic.
Where the customer is imposing on someone to do their job. Yeah.
But it's like, that's what keeps this place special. I mean, it's just like, if it wasn't like that, we'd be living in Munich or something. So
I mean, for sure. And also maybe it's a little bit of like Stockholm syndrome, but when someone's actually nice to you here, you're like, oh God, the sun is so warm, Yeah,
we recently, have you been to Birdie's before?
No, it's on the list.
So good, and the service is insanely good. It's amazing. And it's American style food, which is like,
I saw they had buffalo wings on
the wings are really good, and really, really good. Highly suggest making a trip up to Prince Arberg for it. But it was this exact thing. The waiters were so nice. The bartender was so nice. And we were like, where are we?
What's the catch?
Are we in Brooklyn? What's going on? And so it's like, it's totally like Stockholm syndrome. You end up feeling like, it's, but I guess for the people who do it right, like, it's awesome.
Yeah. No, I would like to think that's something that we do right.
And so how did Crews and Brews come about? Because obviously you're deeply in the coffee scene here. Like, before we started recording, you were talking about a cupping with one of the folks at the coffee shop we're at here. So like, did you want to sort of expand the coffee community into running, or what was well,
I think
it was
thought
there?
I guess it was kind of a few things, because like we kind of realized Division BPM couldn't be everything.
No, of course.
Like, it needed to kind of have a bit of a focus in, the kind of community we were trying to create, and like what kind of activities we wanted to do as a group. But me, like, I guess there are two parts that come from my side. One is I, as a consumer of running media, something that I find really interesting is kind of like the origin story of things. Not too dissimilar to what you are talking about here, or like the kind of questions you ask for your podcast. It's like, I'm interested in people's why, on like why they started running, why they formed their group, why they chose to run the route that they do, why that coffee is their favorite coffee.
Less like about the pinnacles. I feel like this is the thing that drove me to talking with people like you, is there's all this stuff about like people succeeding, or people doing this like 300-mile run, or all these like successes or like destinations, but none of the other stuff.
No, and I mean, you ask any runner, like even someone who achieves great things, it's like a rule of thirds. A third of the runs feel good, a third are fine, a third feel like shit.
Totally.
And it's about like everything in between. And kind of with talking to my friend Jack, we were like, there's this huge crossover between running crews and the places they meet, namely like coffee shops. And there's almost kind of this like democratization that happens at that crossover, because people that don't traditionally see themselves as runners see this group meeting every week outside of their coffee shop, and they ask, hey, can I join you guys? And they show up, and they're old trainers and they're track bottoms, and a year later they're running their first half marathon. And we saw that kind of happening in lots of places. And while the idea was like, I guess, germinating, one of my favorite coffee roasters reached out to ask if we would collaborate on a shakeout run ahead of the Berlin Marathon 2 years ago. Hardlines, they're a roaster from Cardiff, amazing, killer brand, very funny guys. And we did this run, started at Muted Horn across from Isla. We did just a 7K, 6K shakeout loop on the field. Torrential rain, everyone was smiling, having the best time, came back, coffee, pastries, the whole thing. And we kind of thought, like, there's something here. There's something here, because the pictures we took, we didn't expect it to feel like we were documenting like this kind of, I mean, cultural movement is maybe a little bit too high-minded, but there was definitely something like a snapshot of culture that was happening there, and we wanted to expand on that. So Jack and I had put together this idea on how we pitch it to get support.
Totally.
So we pitched it to Shoe Company, we pitched it to my day job, because outside of Isla, I work full-time for Minor Figures, which is an oat milk producer. And obviously, it's important for us to reach new markets and also support like customers and markets that have supported us. And so if you find a running brand and you find a coffee brand, it kind of makes supporting this type of project quite straightforward. So yeah, at this point we've taken it to, so we started here, Athens, Dublin, Barcelona, Copenhagen, London. We're going to Valencia for a whole week for the marathon.
You were mentioning, is the Valencia marathon still on with the flooding? Or?
It is, yeah, it is. So mostly the city center wasn't affected. It was mostly the periphery, and they've given it the go ahead. And we're very like grateful that New Balance has given us the flexibility to pivot our program, because we're taking over this coffee kiosk for the whole week.
Okay, well,
and the idea was to have, because usually a lot of like big international marathons like Valencia are very much about like the big hypey crews from abroad.
Yeah,
and we wanted to create
we all know then they take up a lot of energy, but there's smaller people that want to do something that's super targeted and bringing high coffee culture to Spain. I'm excited to
well, this kiosk is already doing it. So they're part of a small chain, 7 shops, I think, called News and Coffee. And this particular one is franchised to the people that do Solo magazine, which is like a really beautiful coffee magazine. And our idea was to host something that would reach out to the local Spanish community.
Yeah.
And so every day for the whole week, we have 2 events that are hosted by local Spanish crews. And they're not like crews in the modern sense, but it's like old people in their 50s and 60s.
Like
friend groups, but like also old school running teams.
Yeah, which are like the Vereins and you would have in Berlin.
Exactly.
Which are numerous, and like I'd say the background to all this new running culture here in Berlin is these older Vereins, like the Mauerweglaufverein, like so many of these older German groups.
Yeah.
Which I definitely want to speak to on this podcast as well, because I think that their stories are also really important. But so you guys are basically collaborating with these local Spanish running groups?
Exactly. And we had a pretty concrete schedule on what we were going to do. But I reached out to every group and said, look, I'm sorry about what's happened. Completely understand if your head's elsewhere. It's our goal to still come and to provide this space for gathering materials, raising money. We're still going to have the coffee, the drinks, the food. So if you guys are exhausted and you just need a place to be and want to come by and have a coffee on us, that's cool. If you want to put on a little run for Friends for Mental Health, also great. We'll be there either way. And the response has been quite good, which is really nice. And I think we kind of had this realization, Jack and I, where it's like, yeah, even if the race doesn't stop, the culture and the people, the reason why we do this, that doesn't stop. And as long as it doesn't feel invasive, and as long as they feel like they're in a place where they can say something about what's happening, that flood will also define this race. And that flood has also had an effect on these running groups. And, the picture that we paint online of like smiling faces and oat flat whites and all of this is like also only a part of it. So yeah, we're going to go there. And I think the mood will probably be a lot more somber than we expected, but to be honest, it feels good that we're able to leverage this thing that we have that now has financial support from companies that can do that, to do something that can give back.
For the full spectrum of emotions.
Yeah.
So that you can support people, because people don't just go to coffee shops when they're feeling good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, people are...
The number of people I've seen cry in Isla,
Yeah, exactly. And also running can be emotional as well. I think that there's like the number of people of my friends that say like, the marathons can be one of the most emotional things of their lives, right? And so like running can also bring out like a full spectrum of emotions, and I can imagine that like it could be heavy at times, but that's okay. You guys are there to sort of hold space for folks and just provide them a platform to pick things back up.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I think at the end of the day, like this whole project, this isn't about us. This project is about them. And so I think kind of turning it back around and saying like, look, we're offering the platform. It's up to you to fill it. And just to kind of remind them that it's there to be whatever they want it to be, and not like this kind of pre-formulated thing that maybe they see that we do online.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the next one.
Sweet. Well, thank you. I guess where can people find you? Find the different crews that you are involved in.
I mean,
where's the best place?
Instagram. Okay. Sadly, I have 4 Instagram accounts.
You have 4 Instagram accounts
because there's the cafe, so Isla Coffee Berlin, and Division BPM, Crews Brews Berlin, and mine is boring.
That's a wrap on episode 2 of CrewCast. A huge thanks to Peter for joining us and sharing his journey of connecting Berliners through running, music, coffee, and community. Don't forget to check out BPM Sundays at Isla Coffee, right next to Tempelhofer Feld. It's a perfect way to end your weekend. As is discussed in the episode, the recent floods in Valencia devastated a community. If you feel inclined, I've left a link in the description where you can contribute to relief efforts. Coming up next week, we'll be joined by Ramona Tyler, one of the founders of Pace Berlin, a Flinta first running group that's creating safe spaces for runners in Berlin. Be sure to tune in. Thanks for listening.